There is a particular kind of cold that lives only in Kentucky in late October. It does not simply arrive. It hunts. It works its way through every gap in every wall, settles into the marrow of old houses and old men alike. On the night this story truly begins, that cold had found the Miller farm and made itself at home, and a 12-year-old boy named Tommy was lying in his attic room listening to it, waiting for it to pass the way he had learned to wait for many things in the 2 years since his mother died. He was not asleep. He was doing what he did every night before sleep could come, winding the music box. It was a rosewood box, dark and polished, small enough to cup in both hands. On the lid, a pane of glass revealed the brass machinery inside. Tiny gears, a pin cylinder, the intricate heart of a thing built to do one small and necessary job. Tommy's mother, Sarah, had pressed it into his hands 2 days before the ambulance came for the last time. Her grip had been stronger than it had any right to be, given everything. Her voice had been very quiet. "This is for when the quiet gets too loud, Tommy. You wind us up, and you remember that I'm right there with you in the psalm." He turned the key 3 times. He lifted the lid. The notes fell into the cold attic air like something physical, warm, impossibly gentle, precise as a hand placed on a shoulder in the dark. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." For 30 seconds, the fear and the hunger and the long unbroken weight of the past 2 years receded. He wasn't the poor kid with the fraying coat. He wasn't the boy watching his grandfather's hands shake worse every cold morning. He was just loved. He was safe inside his mother's voice. Then the song slowed. The last note hung in the air and faded into the wind outside. Tommy closed the lid with a reverent click, touched the smooth wood once, and lay back in the dark. The Miller farm had been dying for longer than Tommy had been alive. His grandfather Arthur was a man who had once been capable of anything, who could fix a combine engine with a wrench and a curse, carry a 100-pound feed sack without breaking stride. Now his hands were twisted by arthritis into shapes that made the simple task of buttering bread into an act of visible suffering. Tommy watched him at the kitchen table each evening and understood, without being told, that the farm and the old man were on the same trajectory. Both of them magnificent once. Both of them running out of time. He took the long way home from the school bus every afternoon, cutting through briar woods to avoid the older boys who gathered by the main road. Boys who could smell the poverty on him, the fraying coat, the sneakers held together with electrical tape, and who found it amusing. The woods were safer. The woods just watched. It was on one of those afternoon walks, 3 weeks into November, that he first saw her. He smelled the Warren property before he saw it. A dense, heavy smell of manure and rot, and something underneath both of those that spoke of an animal pushed past the point where neglect becomes something darker. Tommy stopped at the tree line and looked through the cedar branches into the back paddock. She was standing in the center of it. A chestnut mare, or what had once been chestnut, beneath the filth that coated her coat like a second skin. Her head hung almost to her knees. Her ribs were stark ridges against her skin. Her hip bones jutted like the edges of a collapsed roof. She stood with the particular stillness of a creature that has been convinced, through long and patient suffering, that there is no point in moving. Then the back door of the Warren house slammed open. "You stupid beast." Bert Warren's voice cracked across the frozen air. He appeared on the porch and hurled a slop bucket into the yard. "Don't you die on me yet. I ain't digging a hole in this freeze." The mare flinched. A small movement, a ripple that ran through her whole body, a full body shrinking. Warren went back inside. The door slammed. The paddock was silent again. Tommy stood at the tree line for a long time. He recognized that flinch. He knew what it felt like to be small and cold and yelled at. To be looked at as a burden rather than a person. He could not walk away. It was not a decision. It was a realization. He would come back tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that, the ritual took shape over 3 weeks. Every day after school, Tommy slipped into his grandfather's root cellar and pocketed 2 whizzing apples or a soft carrot, feeling like a thief in his own home. Then he made the trek through the woods to the fence line at the back of Lauren's property. He started calling her Dusty in his head, because she looked like something forgotten in an attic. Something that, with the right attention, might still remember what it was before the dust settled. She was terrified. Any movement too quick sent her scrambling backward, eyes rolling white with panic. She had been taught, with terrible thoroughness, that humans were the preamble to pain. Tommy learned to be still. He let his breathing slow. He hummed a low, wordless sound, just a vibration in his throat, something that didn't demand anything from her. "It's okay, girl. I'm not him. I'm just Tommy. I'm nobody." He sat in the snow with his jeans soaking through and his arm aching and his fingers going numb, holding an apple slice through the wire. He did not pull back. He waited the way you wait when waiting is the only thing you have to give. On the 9th day, she came to him. She approached with agonizing slowness, her neck stretching forward, her nostrils flaring to take in everything the air could tell her about this boy who kept coming back. Her velvet lip brushed his frozen fingers, warm and impossibly soft. She took the apple slice with a delicacy that made his chest ache. The careful gentleness of a large animal choosing not to be clumsy. She crunched it quietly. Her dark eyes moved to his face. Tommy let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for 9 days. Or maybe for 2 years. "That's a good girl, Dusty." The tears came before he could stop them. "You're a good girl." The bond deepened with every visit. Soon she was waiting at the fence line, pacing the mud, murmuring a low greeting when she heard his red coat emerge from the trees. He began to share more than just apples. He shared his silence. He shared his grief. He told her about the phone line being shut off, about the letter he'd found that his grandfather didn't know he'd seen, about the long specific loneliness of being 12 and scared with no one to tell. Dusty would listen with her whole body. She would press her weight against the wire, leaning toward him, craving the contact as much as the food. And Tommy understood something on those cold afternoons, that hunger takes many forms. That some of the worst kinds are invisible. That you can be starving for something and the world will look at you and see nothing wrong at all. On a Tuesday when the temperature had plunged into the low 20s, he brought the music box. He wrapped it in his mother's red wool scarf and set it on a flat fence post and looked at it for a long moment. "My mama used to say the song could fix anything. She said it was magic. I don't know if I believe in magic anymore, Dusty. But maybe you do." He wound the key. He lifted the lid. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The notes drifted through the desolate air, bright and defiant against the gray, like a candle flame in an open field. Dusty's ears swiveled forward. She stopped chewing. She stood perfectly still, her whole enormous self oriented toward the sound. "Please don't take my sunshine away." The mare lowered her heavy head over the barbed wire and rested her chin, gently, on Tommy's shoulder. The weight of her was solid and warm and more real than almost anything he had touched in the past 2 years. He wrapped his arms around her neck, buried his face in her mane, and wept. "I miss her, Dusty. I miss her so much. It feels like there's a hole and the wind goes straight through it and I can't make it stop." The mare stood like a sentinel. The music box played its final slowing notes into the winter wind. 2 broken things held each other up in the cold, and it was enough. It was exactly enough. The blizzard arrived 2 days before Thanksgiving. Not building slowly, simply there, a wall of white that descended on the valley before dawn. Tommy sat at his classroom desk staring at the storm, his pencil untouched. He could not think about fractions. All he could see was an open paddock. No shelter. A horse who was already barely surviving. When the final bell rang, he ran. 2 miles through drifts that reached his knees, through wind that hit his face like something thrown. His lungs burned. His sneakers soaked through immediately. He ran with the focus of someone who has decided that whatever happens to himself doesn't matter relative to what he might find when he arrives. When he arrived, Dusty was down. She was lying on her side in the center of the paddock, half buried in drifting snow. Her eyes closed, not moving. The snow continued to fall on her, patient and indifferent, already beginning to erase her outline. No, please, get up. The back door slammed. Instinct threw Tommy behind a snow-covered cedar bush. He pressed his face into the ice, heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his jaw. Burt Warren stood on his porch in heavy coveralls, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, and looked at the fallen mirror the way a man looks at an appliance that has broken at an inconvenient time. Not grief. Annoyance. The calculation of inconvenience. He pulled out his phone. Yeah, it's me. The damn nag is down. Ain't worth the vet bill. She's just bones anyway. Yeah, if she ain't up by Friday, come get her with the truck. The glue factory pays $50 for the carcass. That's 50 more than she's worth alive. He laughed. Hung up. Spat into the snow. Went back inside to his warm house. Tommy lay in the snow for a long time. Friday. Today was Wednesday afternoon. $50 was the price Warren had put on Dusty's life. Tommy knew with absolute certainty that she could not get up on her own. She was out of fuel. The apples and carrots were loaf, but they were not sustenance. She needed high-calorie grain. She needed it tonight. Without it, she had hours. Maybe a day. He crawled backward into the trees. Then he stood and ran home. He went straight to the ceramic cookie jar on top of the refrigerator, Arthur's emergency fund, more symbol than substance. He dragged a chair over, peered inside. 3 pennies in a layer of dust. He stared into the hollow dark and climbed back down, and his mind was already moving, already sorting through the inventory of everything he owned, looking for value. There was nothing. No allowance. No toys worth selling. He walked upstairs to his attic room. Dim, cold. He stood before his bedside table. The rosewood music box glinted in the thin winter light, the brass key catching the last gray illumination of a day that was folding in on itself. Tommy stopped breathing. He reached out and touched the smooth wood. He knew the surface by heart, every grain, the exact weight of the lid, the precise resistance of the key, the number of turns. He knew it the way you know the things that are no longer possessions but self. This was his mother. This was her voice. This was the only thing that made the nights bearable. He looked at the box. Then he closed his eyes and saw Dusty lying in the snow. If he kept the box, he kept the memory. But he lost the life. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered to the empty room. I have to. He wrapped the box in his mother's red wool scarf with the care of someone preparing something sacred for a journey from which it might not return. He put the bundle in his backpack. He walked out the door without telling his grandfather, because if he said it out loud it would become real in a way he couldn't survive, and he needed to survive it after, when there was nothing left to unmake. 4 miles to town. The wind whipped his face raw. His toes went numb. He walked and thought of Dusty in the snow, and it moved his legs. That was all he had. It was enough. The neon sign of Higgins and Son Pawn buzzed angrily in the early dark, casting a red glow on the snow. Tommy pushed through the door. A bell jingled cheerily, a sound impossibly wrong for the moment. David Higgins looked up from his ledger. A large man with kine eyes behind thick glasses. When he saw Tommy Miller, blue-lipped, red-rimmed, vibrating with desperation, his face arranged itself carefully into neutrality. Tommy Miller. What on earth are you doing out in this weather, son? Is Arthur okay? He's fine, Mr. Higgins. Tommy's voice was shaking so badly he could barely form the words. He placed the red bundle on the counter and unwrapped it slowly. The rosewood box glinted under the fluorescent lights, too fine for this setting, and knowing it. That's a beauty. Your daddy commissioned this from that fellow in Lexington, didn't he? It was Mama's. I need to sell it. How much? Higgins looked at the boy for a long time. Tommy, are you sure? This is a keepsake. I have to. Please? How much? Higgins rubbed his face. Business is slow. Nobody's buying knickknacks in November. For a music box, even a nice one, I can maybe do $40. Tommy's heart dropped through the floor. 40 wasn't enough. The feed he needed would cost more. Please, Mr. Higgins. I need 60. It's life or death. Please? Higgins looked at the desperate child. He looked at the exquisite box. He thought about his own grandson. He thought about profit margins for approximately 1.5 seconds before abandoning the calculation entirely. He reached into the register and pulled out 3 20s. Then he reached into his own wallet and added a fourth. $80, he said softly, sliding the bills across the glass. Because it's almost Christmas. And Tommy, I'm putting this in the back safe. 30 days. I won't put it out for sale. If you can come back for it, it'll be here. Tommy grabbed the money. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Higgins. He ran to the feed store just as the owner was flipping the sign to closed. He slapped the wet bills on the counter and named his order. 2 50-pound sacks of senior mash. A bag of alfalfa cubes. He walked out into the storm with 100 pounds of feed, no car, and 4 miles of dark between himself and the paddock. Behind the hardware store, he found a child's plastic toboggan, red and abandoned. He loaded the sacks, tied them with twine, looped the pole rope around his waist, and started walking. Every step was a negotiation with physics and cold and exhaustion. The rope cut into and through his coat. He fell 3 times, each time lying in the snow a moment, cheek against the ice, looking sideways at the white world, and each time he got back up and kept pulling. He thought of one thing, Dusty in the snow, waiting. It was the only thought he needed. It moved his legs. That was all it had to do. At midnight, with Arthur's snoring filling the farmhouse, Tommy crept out into the frozen world. He carried a thermos of hot water and a plastic bucket. The sky had cleared after the blizzard, and the stars were brilliant and merciless overhead. The snow gave off a pale phosphorescence, as if the ground were trying to return all the light it had absorbed through the long day. He found her where he had left her. A dark mound in the white field. He knelt and pulled off his glove to touch her neck, ice cold, and pressed his fingers in and waited, and then felt it, the faint, thready pulse beneath her jaw. Barely there. But there. He poured the grain into the bucket, added the hot water, stirred until it steamed, a rich, molasses-heavy smell that filled the cold air with the promise of warmth and calories and survival. He shoved the bucket under her nose. Nothing. Please, he said. It was the most complete prayer he had ever offered. One word, carrying everything. Her nostril twitched. Her body's deep animal intelligence recognized what her conscious mind was too depleted to respond to. Then, with a slowness that was almost geological, one eye opened. Dull. Glazed. Weighing the merits of continuing. But the smell was insistent. She tried to lift her head. She failed. Tommy scrambled around and sat in the snow, lifting her skull into his lap, the full impossible weight of it pressing into his legs with a trust that undid him completely. He scooped a handful of the warm mash and pressed it to her lips. Her tongue moved. She tasted. She swallowed. He fed her like that for an hour. Handful by handful, sitting in the snow with her head in his lap, his legs going numb, talking to her in a low, continuous murmur. Not words exactly. Just the sound of his voice in the dark, telling her that someone was here. That she was not alone. That someone had come. He was scraping the bottom of the bucket when the world exploded into white light. The floodlight on Warren's barn snapped on. The back door banged open. "Who's out there?" Tommy threw himself flat behind Dusty's body, pressing his face into the icy mud, making himself as small as the dark would allow. The shotgun blast tore through the night. The sound was physically enormous. It didn't just exist in the air but occupied it entirely, pushed everything else out. It echoed off the hills and came back. Tommy lay with his hands over his ears and a scream trapped in his throat. "Damn coyotes. Get off my land." The door slammed. The light clicked off. Darkness returned, heavier than before. Tommy lay still for 10 minutes, counting his own heartbeats. Then Dusty grunted. She threw her front legs out. She rocked once, twice, a groan of supreme effort, a body demanding one more thing of itself after everything has already been asked. She heaved herself upright. She swayed. Her legs trembled. But she was standing. She turned her head and exhaled, a long, warm breath that hit Tommy's cold face like a gift. He wept silently into the mud. She was up. She was up. His body waited until he was home before it surrendered. By Friday morning, he was burning with a fever of 103, the attic ceiling rippling, the shadows moving with intentions of their own. He dreamed he was winding the music box, but sand poured out of it instead of sound. He dreamed Dusty was calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach, his legs refusing to move. He thrashed in the sheets. Friday, the truck, and Arthur's voice came close and pressed a cool cloth to his forehead and told him to rest. He lost 2 full days to the dark. When he woke on Sunday afternoon, the fever had broken. The sun was shining. For one suspended moment he lay there simply grateful to be alive, and then Friday crashed back into him. He dressed with clumsy, frantic hands and ran to the Warren farm on legs that felt borrowed. He reached the tree line. He looked at the paddock. The gate was wide open. The paddock was empty. In the frozen mud were the deep-churned ruts of heavy dual wheels, a large truck, a trailer. Evidence of a departure already days old, as permanent as the ground itself. Tommy stood there gripping a sapling for support. The world went gray. He fell to his knees in the slush. A sound ripped from his throat that he didn't recognize as his own. He had sold his mother's voice and dragged 100 pounds of feed 4 miles through a blizzard and been shot at in the dark, and the truck had come anyway. He hadn't been enough. He crawled to the fence and pressed his forehead against the cold wire. Caught on a barb was a patch of red wool, his mother's scarf, lost in the chaos of the shotgun night. He grabbed it and buried his face in the wet, muddy fabric. It didn't smell like lavender anymore. It smelled like mud and cold and the compound grief of failing 2 people at once. He stayed there until he was empty. Then he went home and slept and did not want to wake up. On Monday morning, Arthur shook him awake with an urgency that suggested the world had resumed without waiting for permission. "Tommy, son, you need to come downstairs. There's someone here to see you. A lady. She says it's urgent." Tommy dragged himself down the stairs feeling like something the winter had discarded. Standing in their cramped kitchen was a woman who looked as though she had been installed there by someone with a flair for contrast. She was tall, perhaps 70, with silver hair swept back with elegant severity. She wore tailored riding breeches and tall leather boots. Her eyes were sharpened blue, the kind of blue that has been sharpened by decades against a life that was not always cooperative, and they were looking at Tommy with an expression he couldn't immediately name. Searching. Warm. Underneath both of those things, something that looked almost like it had been waiting. Thomas Miller. I'm Helen Davies. I bought the old Potter estate next to Burt Warren's property. A pause. Put your coat on. Both of you. I have something to show you. Where are we going? Arthur asked. My barn, Helen said. I have a very picky eater who refuses her breakfast unless it's served by a specific young man. Tommy's heart stopped, then restarted, slamming against his ribs with a violence that felt like something being corrected, some terrible equation suddenly resolving on the right side of the equal sign. They drove in silence up a long driveway lined with white fences. Helen's barn was a cathedral of clean straw and warm light, and the sound of horses shifting in deep golden bedding. She led them down the wide aisle without speaking, and the silence was full of something. Some anticipation she was allowing to build. She stopped at the last stall. Her hand rested on the latch. I was watching Warren's property from the ridge, she said quietly. I have night vision binoculars for scouting property lines. I saw a boy dragging a sled through a blizzard. I watched him crawl under a fence in the middle of the night and feed a starving animal by himself, in the dark, in the cold. She paused. I thought, I have a trailer. She slid the door open. Dusty stood in deep golden straw, wearing a warm blue blanket. Her coat still dull from malnutrition, but brushed, the mod gone, the burrs combed out, the white star on her forehead visible and clean and brilliant. She turned her head when the door opened. When she saw Tommy, she let out a loud, piercing whinny that filled the barn from floor to rafter and echoed back and filled it again. Tommy dropped to his knees in the aisle. He couldn't help it. The force of the relief was structural. His legs simply ceased to operate beneath its weight. Go on, Helen said gently. Tommy scrambled into the stall. Dusty met him halfway, lowering her head to press her muzzle hard against his chest, blowing warm air onto his face, nudging his pockets for apples with the shameless confidence of an animal who has established a precedent and expects it to be honored. You're alive, Tommy sobbed, his arms around her neck, his face in her mane. You're safe. You're really, actually safe. Helen's voice, from behind him. I went down there Friday morning. Warren was waiting for the renderer's truck. I offered him 3 times the meat price to load her into my trailer right then. He took the cash. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a clear plastic bag. Inside, muddy and matted but unmistakable, was the red wool scarf. I found this on the fence when I loaded her. Arthur's face changed when he saw it. That was my daughter's. Sarah's. Tommy's mother. Helen went very still. Sarah Miller was your daughter? Yes. A long silence. Helen looked at the scarf, then at the boy holding the horse. Her composure cracked along deep in old lines. Arthur, did Sarah have a music box? Rosewood. Hand-carved gears. It plays. You are my sunshine, Arthur said quietly. Yes. It was Tommy's most precious thing. I haven't seen it in a few days. Helen put a hand over her mouth. My late husband, Robert, was a master clockmaker. He only ever made 10 of those boxes in his life. 3 years ago he was in hospice. His nurse, the one who sat with him every day, who held his hand when he passed, her name was Sarah. Sarah Miller. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. He gave her the last box he ever made. He gave it to her because she was the kindest person he had ever met in the worst year of his life. The barn was very quiet. He sold it, Arthur whispered, the realization arriving like something heavy set down. He sold it to buy the feed. Helen was already turning on her heel. Stay here. I have one more errand. An hour later, she returned. Tommy was sitting in the straw beside Dusty, brushing her legs and humming softly. He looked up when Helen crouched beside him and held out her hand. Resting in her palm was the rosewood music box. Tommy's hand stopped on the brush. He looked at the box. He looked at Helen. He looked at the box again, at the dark polished wood he knew the exact weight of, the way you know the weight of things you've carried every day for years. His fingers reached out before his brain had finished understanding what was happening. Pure recognition. Pure returning. I had a very good conversation with David Higgins, Helen said softly, smiling through tears she wasn't bothering to hide. He was quite relieved to see me. He said a brave young man left this for safekeeping and he very much hoped someone would come for it. Tommy took the box with trembling hands. He wound the key 1, 2, 3 turns and lifted the lid. Plink, 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 plink. You are my sunshine. The notes rose into the rafters and scattered there, filling the warm barn with a brightness that had nothing to do with light. Dusty pressed her muzzle against Tommy's chest. No one in the barn spoke, because there was nothing that needed to be said that the music wasn't already saying better. When the last note faded, Tommy looked at Helen. Thank you. No, Thomas, she said, her voice steady and fierce. Thank you. The winter passed in a slow and quiet healing. Tommy worked at Helen's stable every afternoon, mucking stalls, scrubbing buckets, learning the rhythms of a well-run barn. In exchange, Dusty received the care she had never known, regular feeding, warm blankets, a clean stall. The ribs disappeared, week by week. Her coat shed out the dull winter fuzz and grew in gleaming copper, the color of a new penny in good light. She moved differently, not the tentative negotiation of a creature that doesn't trust the ground, but the easy confidence of one that has concluded the world will probably not take it away. In late February, the vet came for a routine check and straightened up from his examination with a look Tommy didn't immediately understand. Not concern, but something more layered, something with a very large feeling growing inside it. It's not warm bloat, he said. He looked at Tommy and smiled, the full kind, that uses the whole face. She's pregnant, son. Probably due early spring. That night you fed her in the snow, you didn't save one life. You saved two. Tommy sat down on a hay bale and was still for a long time. 2. The foal came on a stormy night in late March. It was not easy. The vet was delayed by a mudslide on the county road. Helen's arthritis was flaring in the den. And so it was Tommy who did what had to be done, who reached inside the dark, warm interior of a living creature and, guided by Helen's steady voice, found the small hoofs and the tiny nose and pulled. He was terrified. He was also, somehow, precisely where he was supposed to be. He looked into Dusty's eyes, wide with pain and fear, in thaw of the blizzard, and the rope around his waist, and the one thought that had carried him 4 miles through the snow. I'm here, girl. I've got you. With one final effort, the foal slid into the straw, and Tommy cleared her nostrils and rubbed her small rib cage and said, "Breathe, please breathe." The foal sneezed, shook her head, blinked at the lamplight with the profound bafflement of the newly arrived. She was a filly. Copper chestnut, nearly a perfect copy of her mother, and right in the center of her small forehead, brilliant and unmistakable, a diamond-shaped white star. Dusty reached back and nickered, a sound so full of tenderness it belonged to a different register than any other horse sound Tommy had ever heard. He sat in the straw and watched a new creature take its first negotiation with gravity, and felt something open in his chest that had been closed for 2 years. Not break open. Open. The way a seed cracks, not from damage but from readiness, from the accumulated pressure of what it was always going to become. On Tommy's 13th birthday, Helen gathered the Millers in the barn aisle and handed Tommy a manila envelope. Inside were legal documents, his name appearing in them with an authority that felt strange and new and right. Those are ownership papers. For the filly. Her name is Sunshine's Promise. Tommy stared at her. Mine? Yours. I've also traced Dusty's tattoo. Her registered name is Dustlight's Dream. She was a championship barrel racer, stolen and lost a decade ago. Her bloodline is extraordinary. Helen pointed to the second page. I've set up a breeding trust. That filly's value ensures you and your grandfather will never lose the farm. In the last paragraph, it includes a full college scholarship. In Sarah Miller's name. Arthur Miller sat down on a hay bale and wept openly, his shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face. Tommy watched his grandfather cry. He had never seen him cry, not once in 2 years, and understood that some griefs are too large for the moment in which they occur, and find their release only later, when something arrives that makes the loss make sense. Helen placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. Your mother's last gift saved Dusty's life. Dusty's life saved the filly's life. In all of it, the music box, the song, the nurse who held a dying man's hand, the clockmaker who gave her his finest work, it all came back to you. She paused. That's not coincidence, Tommy. That's love. Love never ends. It just changes shape. Tommy walked to the stall. He wound the music box 1, 2, 3 turns, and opened the lid. The sweet, familiar melody filled the barn. Sunshine's Promise wobbled over to the gate on her spindly legs and looked at him, her white star shining under the warm lights like a signature. Like something placed there deliberately. Like a promise kept. Tommy laid his hand against her small forehead and felt the warmth of her life beneath his palm. He wasn't alone. He would never be alone again. The song played on. 5 years later, the county fair rodeo arena was a bowl of noise and golden August light. The announcer's voice rang across the stands. Next up in the junior barrel racing finals, riding Sunshine's Promise, Tommy Miller. Beneath him, the mare danced with barely contained electricity, her copper coat gleaming like something molten under the floodlights. In the stands, Arthur sat upright, looking healthier than he had in years. Beside him, Helen Davies waved a program with the unself-conscious joy of someone who has lived long enough to see love pay its debts. Tommy reached into his breast pocket and touched, briefly, carefully, the smooth rosewood of the music box, warm from the heat of his body. He thought of a blizzard, and a rope around his waist, and 30 seconds of crystal and melody in a cold attic room. He thought of a horse pressing her chin to his shoulder while the notes faded into the winter wind. He thought of all the ways love persists, not despite what it costs, but because of it. He patted the mare's neck, right over the white star. Let's fly, girl. The buzzer sounded. They exploded into the arena, a streak of copper in motion and forward light, racing toward a future that was wide open and bright and entirely, irreversibly theirs. Some gifts arrive disguised as loss. Some songs keep playing long after the spring has unwound. Love never ends. It just changes shape,